Welcome back to Forgotten Fronts, the channel where we bring history's most powerful war stories to life. In today's video, we will explore one of the most defining features of the First World War, trench warfare on the Western Front. We'll uncover how the great armies of Europe, which set out in 1914 expecting a short and glorious campaign, became trapped in a nightmare of mud, barbed wire, and unending stalemate. You'll hear why trenches were built, what life inside them was truly like, and how new weapons and tactics shaped the war. Stay with us as we step into the world of trench warfare, where survival was often a greater victory than conquest. When the First World War began in August 1914, few believed it would last more than a few months. Leaders, generals, and even ordinary citizens thought it would be over by Christmas. Germany launched its massive invasion of France through Belgium, following the Schlieffen Plan, hoping to deliver a quick and decisive victory. But the French and British armies resisted fiercely, and by September 1914, at the Battle of the Marne, the German advance was stopped. It was at this moment that the war changed. Neither side could break through the other's lines. The firepower of modern weapons, machine guns, quick-firing artillery, and rifles made charging across open ground nearly suicidal. Armies that had marched with banners and cavalry suddenly found themselves pinned down. To survive, soldiers dug into the earth. At first, these were shallow pits, but soon they grew deeper, stronger, and more organized. Thus began the trench systems that would come to define the Western Front. From the coast of Belgium down through France, a line of trenches stretched nearly 500 miles. It was an unbroken scar across Europe. Each side faced the other in parallel lines, separated by a deadly expanse known as no man's land. This narrow strip of earth, often no more than a few hundred yards wide, became the graveyard of millions. The structure of the trenches was complex. Soldiers dug frontline trenches for combat, support trenches behind them for supplies, and reserve trenches even further back. They were connected by communication trenches, allowing men, food, and ammunition to move forward, and the wounded to be carried back. Barbed wire and sandbags fortified the positions, while wooden planks tried to keep men out of the mud. Observation posts, dugouts, and machine gun nests filled the lines. What had begun as a temporary solution turned into a permanent way of war. By 1915, trench systems had grown into vast networks, sometimes with multiple defensive layers. Armies attempted offensives, but time after time, they were met with withering fire and staggering casualties. The Western Front became a stalemate, where neither side could win quickly, yet neither dared to retreat. Trench warfare was not simply a strategy, it was a prison. For years, millions of soldiers lived and died within these narrow ditches, fighting for inches of ground at the cost of thousands of lives. This grim transformation of warfare marked the true beginning of the Great War's horror. If the idea of trenches sounds like a clever defense, the reality of life inside them was far more terrible. Soldiers endured conditions that stripped away comfort, dignity, and sometimes their will to live. The trenches were muddy, wet, and often collapsing. Rain would turn the floor into thick sludge, and waterlogged boots led to trench foot, a painful condition that could rot flesh and sometimes require amputation. The smell of the trenches was overwhelming. Rotting food, overflowing latrines, unwashed bodies, and tragically, the bodies of fallen comrades who could not be recovered, all blended into a stench that clung to everything. Rats, some as large as cats, thrived in this environment, feeding on scraps and even corpses. Lice were another constant torment, infesting uniforms and causing endless itching. Food was basic and repetitive. Soldiers received bread, tinned meat, and hard biscuits, but supplies were often stale by the time they arrived. Tea or coffee offered some comfort, but luxuries were rare. Letters from home were the true treasure, providing morale in a world of misery. Many men kept diaries, writing about their hopes, fears, and longing for peace. Danger was ever present. Snipers could kill a man who raised his head above the parapet. Artillery barrages rained destruction, leaving craters and shattered bodies. Poison gas, first used in 1915, spread terror as clouds of chlorine or mustard gas rolled across the trenches, burning lungs and skin. Helmets and masks provided some protection, but panic was common. Yet boredom was also a soldier's enemy. Days and weeks could pass with little action beyond patrols and guard duty. This monotony, mixed with the sudden shock of battle, created unbearable strain. Soldiers never knew if the next hour would bring silence, a deadly bombardment, or an order to charge across no man's land into certain death. Still, camaraderie grew strong. Men bonded with their fellow soldiers, sharing rations, jokes, and songs. In the face of horror, humanity endured. There are accounts of soldiers celebrating Christmas together, even exchanging gifts with enemies during brief truces. These fleeting moments of peace shone brightly against the darkness of trench life. Living in the trenches was not just about survival. It was a daily test of endurance, courage, and the human spirit. The trenches became both a shield and a tomb, shaping the character of those who lived within them and haunting their memories for the rest of their lives. Trench warfare was not static by choice. Both sides constantly sought ways to break the deadlock. The battlefield became a laboratory of destruction, where new weapons and tactics were tested with devastating results. Machine guns, capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute, dominated the battlefield. A single gun could cut down waves of advancing troops. Artillery, the true killer of the war, pounded trenches day and night. Shells destroyed dugouts, buried men alive, and left survivors shell-shocked, a term for the psychological trauma caused by relentless bombardment. Poison gas added a new dimension of horror. First used by the Germans at Ypres in 1915, gas attacks caused blindness, suffocation, and burns. The introduction of gas masks helped, but fear of invisible death haunted soldiers long after the clouds dispersed. No man's land was the ultimate symbol of futility. Crossing it meant advancing through barbed wire, mud, shell craters, and enemy fire. Offensives were launched, sometimes with hundreds of thousands of men, only to gain a few yards. Battles like Verdun and the Somme became synonymous with slaughter. At the Somme in 1916, the British suffered nearly 60,000 casualties in a single day, the bloodiest in their history. Technology evolved, but solutions came slowly. Tanks made their debut in 1916. Designed to crush wire and cross trenches, but early models were slow and unreliable. Airplanes began as scouts, but grew into machines that dropped bombs and fought dogfights in the skies. Flamethrowers, mortars, and creeping barrages were all attempts to overcome entrenched defenses. Despite these innovations, the stalemate endured. The cost in human lives was staggering. Millions of men were killed, wounded, or permanently scarred, both physically and mentally. Shell shock became a recognized condition, though little understood at the time. Many soldiers returned home, changed forever, unable to forget the horrors of trench warfare. The Western Front, was not just a battlefield. It was a place where technology, strategy, and human endurance collided in the most brutal way imaginable. The trenches defined World War I, shaping its legacy as a conflict of unimaginable suffering and sacrifice. Trench warfare on the Western Front was more than a military strategy. It was a way of life and a symbol of the Great War's tragedy. It showed how modern technology could outpace old tactics, trapping millions in a struggle that claimed lives on an industrial scale. Yet within the mud and misery, stories of courage, brotherhood, and resilience emerged, reminding us of the human spirit even in the darkest times. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to Forgotten Fronts for more explorations of the battles, strategies, and human stories that shaped history. In our next video, we will dive deeper into the battles that defined trench warfare, where entire nations gambled everything for just a few miles of ground. Until then, remember the lessons of the past and the voices of those who endured it.